Well, welcome to the Followup podcast. My name is Hayden. I am the worship director here at Arbor Church, and today I am joined by Cliff Tadema, our interim pastor, Alison Oconee, our community care pastor, or sometimes she likes to be referred to as our care pastor, or our grief czar, or many other titles. Do you have any you can think of right now, Alison, that you like?
Queen,
okay.
I was waiting for that. That's exactly what I was waiting for.
I don't know why we mess with all the other ones.
Yeah.
Just go straight to it.
Go straight to it.
Straight to it.
And our very special guest who has been away from us for a short amount of time, Scott Hetherington, who spoke on Sunday. Scott, where have you been?
Where have you been?
Tell us all the places
I wonder the same thing. It's been kind of like a fog. No, I think speaking a lot, and then God bless Cliff, coming on board to do some of the speaking. I've kind of got back to the rhythm and roll of school and doing things like that, and looking forward to speaking still, but not quite as often as possible because we got Cliff and Brian and Allison and other people that can speak just as well. So,
well, we've missed you for sure.
Thank you, Hayden. I missed you too, buddy.
Yeah.
Well, did you have any trips or vacation, or were you just working away?
I did take spring break and turned the trip of bringing my daughter home from college in Arizona to a 3-day trip to Sedona as well with my cousin from LA. So that was fun to see her and hang out in Sedona together.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah.
It was fun.
Did you drive?
No, I flew down there. My
okay.
arms were really tired, but it was still a good trip.
But
That's a dad joke right there. That's a dad principle joke right there.
I wasn't ready for that at all.
Totally.
Well, Scott, did you? How many weeks were you out of the pulpit for? Was it only 3?
3, I think. 3 or
Yeah.
I don't think it was 4 or 3.
Oh, right. We had Easter in there, too.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was a big...
Yep.
Yeah. Well, it was great to have you up there, and I'm glad that you did not forget how to preach in those 3 weeks because you brought it yesterday, you brought it on Sunday because this is released on a Wednesday. I got to keep the movie making magic up. So
There you go.
Yeah.
I have to ask because when we were doing Letters to a Young Church, you were given passages to speak on. I'm actually unaware. Were you given the responsibility of creating a message, or did Cliff have a topic and said, "Hey, make this your own for this week"?
Alison and Cliff gave me the topic of forgiveness underneath good news.
Yeah.
And so I went from that point.
Yes. And I've not heard a sermon on Philemon in a while. What drew you to that text in particular?
It's a book that I've taught before, going way back to my days back at Antioch as a junior high pastor. I think one of the first messages I ever did at Antioch in front of the entire church was on Philemon around forgiveness, and I really wove it into a very long story and related it to how I journeyed with my dad when he left my mom and the family, and talking about forgiveness through that. So it's a passage I've been familiar with, and when I think of forgiveness, I go back to that passage just because how it lays out the salvation message and the whole part of how Paul talks to Philemon about whatever he owes you put onto me, and that transfer of true forgiveness. So that's kind of what made me want to go that way.
I really liked it. It was a different approach that I had heard to Philemon, and it's one of those books where you can read it in one sitting very quickly, but the amount that you pulled from it was really, really cool. So I really appreciated that message yesterday.
Thank you.
And I was excited to see where he was going to go with that, because when Alison and I did just tell him forgiveness, so I was anxious to see what scriptures he would use. We did have this presumption, I think, that he was going to use the Bible.
Yes. Yes.
Fortunately, that wasn't understood.
I looked at Cat in the Hat to begin with, but it just couldn't pull enough theology out of it.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Maybe for next time.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I was tickled about it too, because he did a great job of pulling that out. So yeah.
Well, thank you.
I have to ask how you had said that you had spoke on this at Antioch a while back. When you were told forgiveness, was it just like right away, that's where I'm going with this message, or did you spend some time working through maybe a different idea?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I haven't ever preached Philemon in the context of good news before. And so when I talked about forgiveness, I thought about Philemon, but then I thought about, 70 times 7. I thought about the story of Peter. I thought about David or, Joseph and his brothers. So I thought about a lot of different angles, but I just really felt led back to Philemon. And then as I was actually talked to Cliff a little bit about it on the phone, I said, I want it to be a good news message. Not so much who do you need to forgive or who have you not forgiven or how do you forgive? Because I feel that carries a little bit more of a longer message or more of a series. And we're in this series called Good News. So I wanted to remind us, what is the good news of the fact that we're forgiven? And I think we walk around taking that for granted so often. We don't realize, what does that bring to us when we're forgiven? What does that mean behind it? And so I went back to Philemon and read it through that lens and hopefully pulled out some good takeaways for people that they could think on and noodle on a little bit.
Good thing I wrote them down on a Post-it note.
Yes.
Oh, there
because
you go.
I am the
See if I can remember them.
iconic student
See if I
here.
remember them. You can
So
quiz me.
I don't know if I got them all in the right order. But here's why it's good news that you're forgiven.
Let's hear it.
Because you are valued. Was that first? You're useful,
Yep.
worthy,
Yep.
and free.
Yes.
So, good news.
That is good news.
It is good news.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think one of my favorite parts, you touched on it, was that transferring. It's not, and this is what you closed with. So I know I'm going out of order in the podcast. Spoiler alert.
It's all right. I hope
We're
that
going to
no
go
one's
right to the end of the book in the movie.
I hope that no one's listening to this and has not listened to the message already, because I don't think
They're all over the place.
these podcasts will not make a lot of sense.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So we just tell them, go back and listen to the message
Yeah.
if you haven't
Right.
listened.
So if you listen to the last minute, you get the summation, which was awesome.
That was the best part. Just clue in on those last 4 minutes.
No, it was the call to not keep that selfishly for ourselves, but to transfer it to someone else, to transfer it, right?
Right.
So I was struck by that because I don't think I had equated that with selfishness before, but that if you're forgiven and somebody has transferred your debt onto them, it only seems fair or right or appropriate. And the loving thing to do is to do that for other people too then.
Yeah, I wish I could think of the theologian now that I was reading that I've read that from before, back to the parable of the two men, the man that was forgiven much debt and walking right out of that encountered somebody that owed him money and then threw him in jail. So that's where that whole, I'm blanking on his name, says, if we don't transfer what God has given to us and are willing to transfer that to others, then what's the point of salvation and Christianity and grace and mercy?
Wow, that's really good. Yeah.
But that just, I feel like that hits the nail on the head for so many of us because we're so grateful that we're forgiven. But then when we're asked to forgive others, we come up against roadblocks that keep us from that. And so your message really helped reframe the message, the call to forgive, right? That we can do that for others and should. In a word that my mother told me I should never use the word should on people. Apparently, I don't know. So anyhow, I have shame around that word, but we should forgive others. So move in freedom towards that.
This might not be a great question, but I'll ask it anyways. When you were writing this, Scott, who did you find yourself identifying more with, Onesimus or Philemon?
I've always found myself identifying more with Onesimus, but this is where I take some creative liberty. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the author Max Lucado.
Yeah.
Love the guy because I know he takes a lot of liberties with, but this is kind of, I think he's like probably someone that's just inspired me by the way he writes and takes some creative liberties of how maybe some things played out behind the scenes. And I wonder with Onesimus, whether he truly was a runaway, and I think he was, or whether he had sought out Paul for his behalf to beseech, some restoration. Going back to that environment, I don't know what he was carrying with him as to, I'm probably not deserving of what Paul wrote this letter about. And I feel like for me personally, being vulnerable here, I resonate with, I struggle at times. I don't feel worthy of what someone could forgive me or do for me because I've not done enough to earn that, or I've messed up too much before to have that level of trust and reciprocation back to me at times. So I think, and I don't know if he was feeling that way, but that's who I kind of relate to more in that story. Not that I don't relate to Philemon, but that's how I kind of felt Onesimus might have been like going to knock on that door.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, oh man, okay, here I go.
Yeah.
Putting my life in the hands of this, this person here.
I think that's why I resonated with the first couple minutes of the message as opposed to Alison's last couple of minutes. So now you have to listen to the first couple of minutes too. Because
It sounds like I got to work on the middle part of my message. I can get the opening and the closing really good. There's just not a lot in the middle.
we haven't heard from Hayden yet. You never know. Hayden might cover that.
I'm taking some notes here on my phone real quick.
Yeah, please do.
Work on the hamburger part of. You got the two buns down.
Yeah, work on
the hamburger.
Work on the patty,
I love it.
Scott.
The
Work on the
patties.
patty.
Work on the patty.
That's a good education term. That's the way we teach kids to write right there. Anyway,
yes. No, I think for me, when you just said Onesimus, that the thing that you said at the beginning, you've never fallen so much that you can't be forgiven.
yeah, you're never so fallen you can't.
You're never so fallen that you can't. That resonated to me, perhaps because I would tend to be see myself as Onesimus in that also, and having a tendency to think, oh no, this can't be fixed, and that God would say, oh no, I've actually paid the price for that too, was really impactful to me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the other part of Onesimus to me is that if he was a runaway, here he is running away, trying to live this life of freedom and think he's gained it.
Yeah.
And then he encounters Paul, who's in chains as a prisoner, preaching, I'm free.
Yeah.
I guarantee you that was like this cross-section that he finally realized, I truly am not free.
No.
I'm fooling myself. And I wonder, and I know there's been points in my life where I fooled myself about how free I thought I was of something.
Wow.
And Christ says, hold on a second. You really aren't free.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow.
Can you imagine how it feels to have someone advocate for you on the level that Paul did? I mean, I know we have a spiritual advocate too, but even just taking it down to humanity, somebody willing to stand in the gap for you, make an argument for your freedom, and say, charge everything to me. Like, do it for me. I'm telling you that this person is worth forgiving. And if I mean anything to you, put it on me. If you can believe anything, do it for me.
And that's where I hope that I wish that I could have created more of that picture, because what I was really trying to do is that Paul really put himself into an earthly picture of what Jesus does for us day in and day out.
Amen.
He's constantly doing that for us, to Satan, to others, saying, no, I know what he is, but I stand in front of him. I carry the debt. I find him valuable, worthy, useful, and he's free. So don't put that on him anymore. And I think that's what Paul was trying to see to Philemon is, now you see me doing this for Onesimus. Now I need you to replicate that and do the same, because I love you and I know you will. Because you don't think you're able to do it, but God knows you're able to do it because you've received it from him, and everything you've received from him as a believer, you are capable of giving back. It's just a matter if you're choosing to or not.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. There's some real value in that in there. So forgiveness sets us free to be those things.
Yes.
Yes.
But do we embrace that forgiveness the way that we should?
Right.
What was that phrase? It wasn't in, I don't think it was in the manuscript when you sent it to me on Thursday or Friday, but you had said it, and I think you either said it before, I've heard it somewhere else, but I think it's like forgiveness is setting the captive free, but realizing you've been the captive all along. Something along those lines?
Yes. Forgiveness is setting the prisoner free.
Prisoner. Okay.
And discovering you were the prisoner all along.
Yeah. Have you used that before here at Arbor?
Maybe. I've used that phrase a lot when it comes to forgiveness. It's
Okay.
one of my favorite ones.
Yeah.
So I probably have said it here before.
And the other one is the drinking the poison one.
That's
Oh,
from the
yeah.
book, The Shack.
Right. That's right.
I like that quote
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have some very memorable lines, Scott, when you come up and preach, because I heard that, and I'd heard it before, but I think just hearing it in this context, I was like, wow, I've never truly thought about the work that is, right? Is forgiveness is one thing that we think about of like, oh, I just need to, this is the right thing to do, right? Is to forgive somebody and let them, not necessarily off the hook, but say that we're good. But then the second part of forgiveness is what's happening internally.
Yeah, because at least what I've learned in my journey with forgiveness is that my former mother-in-law, my ex-wife's mom, Sarah Holmes, always said something. She always said, acceptance brings peace. And I always used to wrestle with that. I didn't like that. I'm like, well, I'm not going to accept wrong. I'm not going to accept something. She goes, and she'd be like, I don't mean you accept the wrongness of it, but if you accept something in Christ and you look at it through that lens, that's your only path forward to peace. And I thought about her always saying that for years now. And so I take that into the context of forgiveness, and that forgiveness opens the gateway for you to truly encounter peace and contentment with whatever harm and traumas come to you.
Wow.
And it doesn't make sense in the moment because you feel like, especially if it's been wrong and evil done to you, it feels like you're justifying or giving an okay for what happened, but that's not it. It's the idea that I'm going to not let that be to me what evil intended it to be.
Wow.
But that is much, I mean, we can sit here and say that, but that journey is oftentimes years.
Well, I was just going to say it's not a one and done.
No.
Like,
Continual.
it opens the gateway
It's
and wow, I
continual.
step in and now I'm
Yeah.
done. It's like, nope, it's
Yeah.
a destination. I was telling Cliff earlier about a friend who had spoken into my life, and she's just said, your destination is forgiveness. I see you moving in that direction. Just keep going and do like the next right thing, but you need to be heading in that direction, and eventually you'll get there, kind of thing.
It's a topic that comes up a lot in my men's group Aftermath about, there's a lot of guys in that group that have gone through divorce for a variety of reasons. Some on their own faults, some because they've had wrong done to them, but particularly for people that have had wrong done for them in that group, it's the idea of, when can you get to a point to forgive the person that hurt you? Because if you can do that, it doesn't mean there's reconciliation, doesn't mean that there's any of that, but that continual journey of learning to live in forgiveness will bring you that peace and freedom. And that's what I was trying to say, that because we are forgiven by Christ, we are free. And we think we're living in that freedom, but are we truly living in the full freedom that there is to offer?
Wow.
So would you say that if somebody was like, yes, I'm living in that freedom, I've been forgiven, but you don't offer it to somebody else, then you're not really free? You
just
can't
went deep right there. That was good. I would think that, let me rephrase. What I heard you ask, Alison, was that if you tell somebody, I feel I'm living in the freedom, I feel like I've been forgiven, yet that person is withholding forgiveness from somebody else. I think I would say to them is, you may say you're living in freedom, but are you reciprocating that same freedom and opportunity to somebody else? Because by withholding forgiveness from somebody, whether you see it or not, that is a chain of the enemy. That's a stronghold that they could have in your life that you may not see the visible elements of right now, but it will come back around. And that's why it's not just a one and done. Like you said, it's a continual journey. The Bible says if you go to the altar, remember you have an offense against somebody, go and set it right. And if you are withholding forgiveness from somebody for whatever valid reason you have, my encouragement would be you need to go to Christ first and wrestle through that. Because I don't think you ever are going to encounter the true freedom and value, not only of yourself, but of other people in the way he wants you to view people.
So, Scott, you said during the message that I think this topic of forgiveness could actually very easily be a series.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think it kind of deserves that. So what would you do? What would you suggest that series look like? And I know obviously we can't get to all the information, but kind of the pieces that you'd say, man, that we should talk about it from this perspective, this one, or this one.
That's a great question.
Man, and I just want to say right now that I am not the expert on forgiveness. I don't want people to think that they're listening to this podcast.
You spoke on it, man.
I know.
You're the
I
expert
just
here.
want
You
to say
are.
I'm not trying to do false humility here. This has been a journey for me as well. For me, I think, and I'm just going off experience of the support and camaraderie I've had with many people that have been hurt, is that for me, the first thing is breaking down what it is not. And that doesn't seem like the logical entryway, but so many people have defenses up about what their perception of forgiveness is, that I believe if we can dismantle the perceptions, it opens up a willingness to hear more. Because when you tell somebody, for example, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means you will never forget, and you may never fully lose the hurt and trauma of the wrong done to you. And the minute you say that to somebody, there's almost like this, oh, they get it. They're not telling me that it's just going to be gone and butterflies and rainbows. But I think if you dismantle the perceptions people have of what God means to forgive, or the church, or we do, then you can open the doorway to usher in what is forgiveness. And it's really more about releasing yourself from allowing, like Joseph said, what you meant for evil, God can do for good. And we can't see that ever oftentimes, and it still takes a journey to get there. But that's, to me, where I would start from that point, then usher in what is forgiveness, and then you can tackle the how, the why, and all of that.
Lisa Turkhurst did a great series. I just did it this winter trimester with a group. It was called Forgiving What You Can't Forget. And she laid it out in a 6 easy weeks.
6-step approach.
Yeah, oh my gosh, the grueling homework that we had to do, though, it was not easy. It should have been a 12-week course. But yeah, she's been through some heartache herself and almost lost a marriage over it. And God has reconciled their marriage, but she wrote all this material before she knew how it was going to end up. So, it wasn't easy. But I'd highly recommend it, unless we're going to teach it here. And then scrap Lisa Turkhurst, just tune into Arbor. We'll cover it here.
That'll all be during Scott's 6-week forgiveness series.
Yes. Or 6 to 12 weeks.
6 to 12 weeks.
I heard
Just
Alison say.
Book
yeah.
me up.
Yeah.
I suddenly think my calendar is full. Oh, yeah, I'm gone till September.
Well, and the problem is, that God would give you homework, of the kind where you actually have to practice it yourself.
Exactly.
Real time, it's like there's a lecture and lab, and I always think, this is the lab. I'm doing the...
Dude, that is so true, isn't it, Alison?
Yes, every time.
I don't know what you're teaching on Mother's Day, but I hope you picked well, because actually I was...
Prosperity.
Prosperity is what you're teaching on. I have threatened the Holy Spirit with that more than once.
How to manage imminent riches.
Yes.
Test me in this, Lord.
Help me, Lord, help me deal with all this. Yeah. I have found that so true that I was talking to somebody about that, and I said I'm not teaching 2 weeks from now or something. I think a friend had asked me if I was going to be teaching, they might stop in or something, and I said, well, no, I won't be. We got a guy who's actually teaching on forgiveness, and I'm really thankful it's not me.
Thanks, Cliff.
And they said, why? And I said, man, because God just works me over on those
deals. That's how it works.
deals.
You and Allison, everybody look down the list and they go, okay, yes, give this one to Scott.
Self-control, yours.
It doesn't surprise me. I've been the first for many things here. The first video thing.
You're
the first
a guinea
whatever.
pig,
I am
man.
the guinea pig.
I'm excited to hear your sermon on giving in 2 weeks. That'll be great.
Oh, goodness gracious. You know what, though? Going back to that, what you just said, I'm serious. This week coming up to leading to the message, I was like feeling really down on myself just about my area of forgiveness that I struggle with is not so much forgiveness of others. I'm almost too quick to do that at times. Mine is letting myself be forgiven and living in that forgiveness. Because when I go back to something, I look back and I'm like, oh man, I messed up in that again. I didn't make the best financial decision there again, or I missed that opportunity. Man, I'm telling you what, that is like the rock on my head the enemy just uses to push me down. I felt that heavily this week. And it took me a lot of work just to get to the point of you are forgiven. You just need to live in that forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm telling you, that is hard for some people. And that's, for me right there, that's the hardest part of forgiveness, is me living in it towards myself.
Oh.
You know, I had a really interesting experience with that personally, because I find the same thing. I'm much harder on myself. And I remember praying one time about that. It was actually after I was out of prison, and I'm praying about, Lord, how come I can't get past this? And I've asked for forgiveness. I know you've forgiven me. And the Holy Spirit said, I forgave you 10 years ago. When are you going to forgive yourself?
Yeah.
And I went, oh my goodness. And then he said, do you think you are better than me as far as justice goes? Wow. And I went, oh, so you hold your standard higher than you think mine is. You just said you knew I forgave you, but you had a hard time forgiving yourself. Like,
wow.
You are thinking your standard of justice is higher than mine? Oh, it just cut me to the quick, man. I just went, oh, Lord, I'm sorry. And because I fight with that,
Yeah.
And somehow I think I'm better because of that, really?
Right.
But I do, I mean, I hate to admit it. We're not recording this, right? I just said that
I
out
can
loud,
stop
but-
recording.
There's only 55 people that'll watch.
Oh, good. Phew.
Just bleep it out.
Nobody will tell anybody
Put a
else.
black
so
bar
we're good.
over his face, over his eyes.
Distort your voice, blur it.
Yeah, I can throw some shadows on. I don't know. Yeah, we'll see what happens.
You brought up an interesting thing, though. What was it? Oh, the joys of aging. It was... Sorry, rewind.
To what I said or what Cliff said?
No, what did he just end on?
He was talking about God.
I know what it was. So many people in my forgiveness Bible study had a hard time forgiving somebody who's not alive anymore to apologize.
Oh,
so when you said, I was sorry, that's what stirred that in me. But sometimes you need to forgive someone who isn't in a position to ask for your forgiveness or to make things right. So I know I'm
Or doesn't even
rabbit
want to.
trailing because
Yeah,
this is not the case in Philemon.
Right.
So, but
Yeah.
but complications.
But part of me wonders, did Philemon think he needed to be forgiven for anything? Philemon himself.
Oh, wow.
Probably
That's a whole
not till
different angle.
yeah.
But that's a whole different trail to talk about. What is it that Philemon needed to seek forgiveness from Onesimus for?
Wow.
That's a whole nother conversation in that.
Max
book.
could have a lot of fun with that.
Yeah.
What do we know of the rest of the story? What do we know about these guys afterwards?
Well, I think I hinted
Scott,
at
can I
it.
stop you real fast?
Yeah.
Can you raise your microphone?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think I hinted at it more in second service about what happened to both of them. And you can piece a few things. Onesimus becomes quite involved in Paul's ministry. And you can see his name pop up through several of his books and things. And then if you go to some historians of the day, some of them talk of the leader of the church in the Colossae area is Onesimus. Whether that's the same Onesimus or not can be up for debate. But I've always found it interesting to be like, if Paul called him, because the only other person Paul really calls his son is Timothy. And Timothy was like being groomed to lead. And so, that's where I wonder if the journey through that was Philemon realizing God has a plan for Onesimus. And until I restored and did forgiveness here, what was my part in God's plan here? So that I become less and you become more. And that's the story of Christ right there. He did not attain, God had something to be grasped, but took on the very role of man. So he became less so that we could become more in him. So that's where I tend to think it played out.
Wow.
Love it. One thing I learned that was new was that the book of Colossians was a letter written at the same time by Paul, delivered by the same courier service,
Yeah.
Onesimus. And he delivered both letters, Philemon and the book of Colossians,
And then he had
at the
to
same time.
share that passage I did about forgiveness. That whole line of there, legal indebtedness is gone.
Yeah.
connected to the letter Philemon and wrote, he's like, so he was really putting, and I think he did that to Philemon because he trusted the level of integrity and man of God that Philemon was, that I can talk to you this way. You don't see Paul do that too directly with many other individuals. It's more of a church body. But I think that says something about just having people in your life that can look at you and go, okay, Cliff, what's going on here?
So 2:14, Colossians 2:14, he, Jesus, canceled the record of the charges against us and took it away by nailing it to the cross. I loved the crossover, the transfer there.
Yeah.
That was awesome. Transferable learning.
Well, we've hit the half-hour mark, so I think it's time that we wrap up.
You didn't ask your famous question.
Last time I tried to, Scott said he didn't like that.
No,
question.
you can ask
I
a famous.
love
What's the
it.
famous question?
That's
what
my
is- what
favorite.
Now
is-
you
things
have
you-
to. Now the whole audience is waiting. So go for it, Hayden.
What are some of the things you might have had to cut out, if there was any?
I think I just shared one about how the story kind of wrapped up in the possibility, and I know that's some creative interpretation, but what happened there, to me, the fact that Onesimus continues to be mentioned shows that Philemon and him got to a place where that wasn't going to be a barrier in ministry anymore, and that speaks to volumes of that. I think the other thing that time didn't allow to go into, which would be a whole nother thing, I think there's a whole topic in there around slavery and the equality of man that for a long time the church has said, well, the Bible doesn't address slavery. I think Philemon does very directly. Mm-hmm. And if you don't look at it through a certain lens, you're going to miss that. And when he says no longer as a slave, but as a fellow man and a brother, there's a tiered approach there that Paul's taking that I wonder, forcing Philemon to relook the whole idea of owning slaves. And I think there's a whole conversation in there to have that Paul addresses through some other books. So those are a lot of things that if you ever did a book study on Philemon, that I think there's a lot of things in there in that short book that there's just such meat in theology.
Yeah, there's something else that we talked about on the phone that you couldn't put in because of all this stuff, and so it wound up on the cutting room floor. Is the idea that forgiveness could actually be selfish in a way because it sets us free. So if we just are smart enough to know I need to be free here, we'd be willing to forgive, and that forgiveness sets us free. And then in so many different areas, I mean, tying that back into the ones that you hit, it sets us free to be worthy, to be valued, but it also sets us free from all the stuff that binds us.
Yeah,
that was great. That you can't get to it all. So,
well, I think it sets us free to view people in a way that maybe we can't on our own.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is great about learning to forgive people and trying to see them through the lens that Paul saw Onesimus and Paul saw Philemon and Jesus sees us.
Yeah. So it was a great question, Hayden. Way to go.
I'm sorry that I ever said I didn't like that question. I do like that question, Hayden. I'm sorry.
Never
That's
give
all
up
good.
on it.
It must have been the question Brian asked. That was what it was.
Oh, yeah. Brian's known for that.
I love you, Brian.
Any other questions before we close things down? Wow. All right. There's
Nobody in the audience this time. None of my friends trying to yell a question.
Heckling.
From the back row heckling, yeah.
If there's one thing you take away from this podcast is remember that Scott has great buns, just not a solid patty, right?
Wow. Wow.
You cannot put that in the podcast. You
Wow.
gotta edit that before.
Wow.
I can't unhear that.
No.
What? He made the joke himself, okay?
I was doing the reference of like the writing thing. You've never
Yeah.
seen the writing analogy in the
Yeah.
classroom?
I was talking about your sermons. You have great buns on your sermon, and then...
Okay, let's not say it again.
Okay, sorry. Sorry.
Do you forgive him? You know what? Charge it against me. Charge it against
You're
me.
responsible
if
for
there's
this,
anything,
for this nonsense going on in here right now.
charge it against me, Scott.
All right,
That-
well...
I will remember that quote. That was pretty good, Hayden.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, let's wrap things up. Next week, we have who in the pulpit? Cliff.
The big
All right.
man.
The big man. And
What's
then
the topic?
The greatest news of all, love.
All right.
Love. So I'm going to enjoy this next week. See?
Good. Thank you. See, this is how they do this.
It is how they do this.
Sorry. You're a little scapegoat.
It's all good. I'm good with it. That's my penance in life.
Well, join us in person or online this Sunday to hear Cliff's message on the greatest news of all. And you can find the follow-up for that message on Facebook and YouTube next Wednesday. Other than that, we will see you guys next week.
Thank you.
Thank
See
you.
ya.